From the cliffs overlooking the Baltic Sea, a hush had settled across a small gathering of fishermen. Their eyes followed the churning waters, fear etched into their brows, as if the restless ocean were a sleeping dragon about to awaken. No gull dared circle overhead, which was an ominous sign for the superstitious among them. These men believed that the uneasy silence meant Chronicle was stirring Chronicle, that powerful deity of the Baltic, rumoured to command hidden storms and harness the might of rogue waves at will. For generations, fisher folk along these shores had spoken hushed prayers and laid small offerings to fish bones, shells, bits of netting to appease the deity who could deliver them bountiful hauls or toss their boats like toys. It was said that Chronicle dwelt in a hidden realm beneath the sea, shielded behind a roiling barrier of clouds and shadows, waiting in silence until some mortal offended him or prayed for his intercession. Many dismissed these stories as nothing more than local superstition, yet no one dared to risk setting sail without first invoking his favour. On this day, those gathered along the rocky shore found no comfort in the hush. Their livelihood depended on the sea, but the sudden stillness seemed to herald a tempest. A fisherman named Avarus, who was older than most in the group, lowered his net and gazed at the horizon. His hair was silvered by age and salt, his hands calloused from decades spent hauling in nets. A quiet man by nature, he was known for his devotion to the old ways and his uncanny instinct for weather changes. "This day feels different," he murmured, loud enough for a few others to hear. At the base of the cliffs, a trio of travellers arrived. A young woman named Rasa, a wide-eyed scholar called Jurgis, and their guide, a hardened warrior with cropped blonde hair named Vilius. These three had journeyed from inland villages where myths still held sway. They had travelled north to see if the old legends about Chronicle were true, that beyond the storms he commanded lurked a deeper secret, an ability to calm raging waters in an instant. Legend claimed that Chronicle possessed a hidden key, forged eons ago, capable of summoning or banishing the fiercest swells the Baltic could conjure. Rasa was the one who first spotted the darkening bank of clouds creeping in from the northwest. She felt a chill in the wind, a subtle shift of power. Though young, her devotion to the ancient stories was unwavering, and she possessed a rare sensitivity to the world's hidden currents. She tapped Jurgis's arm. "Look." Her voice trembled with reverent excitement. Jurgis, used to dusty tomes rather than violent seas, could hardly hide his apprehension. He adjusted the satchel slung over his shoulder, filled with half-forgotten texts about Baltic myths. One passage had brought them here, describing how, with the right incantation and a sacred relic, one could approach Chronicle and bargain to quell storms. For the sake of knowledge, Jurgis sought to verify that passage. "We need to find someone who can take us out there," he said, nodding toward the open sea. Vilius remained silent, but observed the fisherman who stood by. He was keenly aware of the tension in the air. "We'll need more than just a solid boat," he muttered. "We need the goodwill of this Chronicle. If he truly exists, I doubt he welcomes intruders." They approached the fisherman, who eyed them warily. Avarus, noticing the trio's earnest faces, stepped forward in greeting. His voice was carried by the wind, tinged with age and caution. "You're not from around here. What business do you have with these waters?" "We look for Chronicle," Rasa blurted, her cheeks reddening under the fisherman's intense gaze. "We have reason to believe. Well, we seek the Stormlord of the Baltic, to learn about his power and perhaps gain his favour." She hesitated, aware of how foolish she might sound. Avarus's face darkened. He cast a glance at the horizon once more, then gestured for them to follow him to a rocky outcrop by the water's edge. "You're not the first to have come seeking Chronicle," he said, tracing the shape of a wave in the air with a gnarled finger. "Those who venture out unprepared rarely return. Interest in the secrets of the deep can be dangerous." He paused, his eyes on Rasa. "But if you're determined, I might be able to help." They huddled behind a large boulder, where they were shielded from the cutting wind. Ivaras rummaged through a leather pouch at his waist and withdrew a small token. It looked like a shard of ancient bone carved into the shape of a spiraling wave. "Keep this close," he said solemnly. "They say Chronicle can sense offerings made of whalebone. Once, these tokens were used to call for a safe passage during storms. Some hold that the deity can't resist them." Rasa accepted the gift with trembling. "Does this mean you believe we can find him?" "I believe that if your hearts are pure and your minds determined, you might glimpse the door to his domain." The fisherman bowed his head, remembering those who had perished seeking the same. "But be warned, Chronicle does not bend to mortal whims. He is as ancient as the sea, as untamable as lightning." Leaning forward, Ivarus whispered, "There is a place they call the Weeping Trough some leagues offshore. The currents there twist in strange patterns, revealing a hidden passage when the moon is right. That's where you may find him, or so the legends say." Jurgis nodded eagerly, scribbling notes in his journal. Rasa clutched the carved whalebone like a coin of priceless value. Vilius, with an unspoken vow, resolved to protect them no matter the cost. Together, the three travelers looked toward the horizon, where an ominous swirl of clouds had already begun to mass. By noon, they had secured a sturdy fishing boat from another local who, for a hefty price, agreed to sail them beyond the headland. The vessel was small but reliable, with patch sails and a hull adorned with crude carvings of fish and half-faded runes for protection. Averus himself was too old to take the risk, but he had arranged for a younger man, Stasis, to helm the boat. Stasis was a capable mariner, though he made it clear he wanted to hurry back. "I'll drop you near the Weeping Trough, but I won't linger. If Chronicle is about, these waters will be no place for ordinary folk." Setting off, the group felt an immediate surge of restless energy. The gulls, silent earlier, resumed their plaintive calls, circling the boat in weird arcs. The waves grew bolder, slapping against the hull. Once they cleared the protective cove, the wind whipped across the deck, stinging their faces with salt and sprots. The carved whalebone clutched in her right hand. An hour into the journey, the sky darkened more, and the temperature seemed to drop. Jurgis counted the whitecaps, noticing how quickly they had multiplied. Vilius moved to help trim the sails with Stacy's, who was already cursing under his breath. It was an angry sea, and they hadn't even arrived at their intended destination. Eventually, Stacy's pointed to a patch of agitated water up ahead. It was as if a giant invisible spoon were stirring it, creating sudden troughs and unpredictable peaks. "That's the Weeping Trough," he called over the wind, "and it's worse than usual. I'll get as close as I can. After that, you're on your own." No sooner had he spoken than a sudden gust slammed the boat, nearly toppling them. Rasa scrambled to hold on to a rope, heart pounding. She dimly remembered an old verse about the sea dropping its disguise when approached by those who sought its darkest secrets. Into her thoughts raced images of Chronicle, furious eyes like storm clouds, chanting in a language drowned centuries ago. She bit her lip and repeated a silent invocation. They reached the edge of the swirling waters. Stacy struggled to hold the boat steady. To their left they noticed something astonishing. The water parted in an unnatural swell, creating a brief opening before crashing back in on itself. "That's it," Rasa shouted. "We need to go there." She stumbled across the tilting deck, shaken by the boat's violent motions. Stasis could barely respond, too busy fighting the tiller. With a last bit of skillful maneuvering, he guided them to a spot just off the swirling ring of waves. Vilius nodded grimly, adjusting the straps on his knapsack. Together with Jurgis and Rasa, he prepared to leap onto a ledge of slick rock that rose out of the chaos. The rock jutted from the sea like a broken fang, halfway between surface and swirling currents. "This is madness!" Stasis yelled. "But it's your choice." The three travelers dashed onto the rock between waves. Rasa nearly lost her hold, but scrambled forward, spurred by the impetus of the quest. The moment they reached stable ground, Stasis steered away. They watched as the boat vanished into the storm, leaving them alone on a precarious outcropping. The roaring sea surrounded them, and the sky above was now an ink-blot swirl of black and grey. Something shifted. The swirl in the water calmed just enough to reveal a narrow channel leading deeper into the ocean. Jagged pillars of stone jutted up like gateposts. Instinctively, Risa stepped forward, the carved whalebone pressed to her chest. She felt a magnetic pull, an unseen force nudging her to follow the path. With Villiers ahead to scout the precarious footing, they descended the slippery slope, stepping from rock to rock whenever the waves receded. It was a perilous dance, for each wave threatened to drag them away. Yet, as if guided by an otherworldly hand, they managed to maintain their footing. The pulse of the sea thrummed through the stone beneath their feet, echoing in their ears like a distant drum. The path stretched onward, deeper than should have been possible at low tide. Rasa sensed that they were crossing the threshold into Chronicle's domain. At last, they arrived at a broad cavern mouth hidden behind a curtain of water that cascaded from the vault above. The roar was deafening, the spume drenching them. Jurgis took a torch from his satchel, tried in vain to light it. The drenched air refused, but they ventured in half-blind, letting the faint glow from the outside guide them. Inside, the floor was as smooth as glass, punctuated by small tide pools that shimmered with a strange luminescence. The water that trickled from outside formed rivulets around their feet, creating a low, constant hum. The further they went, the quieter the outside storm became, as if this place existed in a pocket separate from the mortal world. A tension hung in the air, the sensation of being watched. Villiers sensed it, his hand hovering near the hilt of the sword at his side. Rasa held the bone carving aloft, calling softly, "Chronicle, if you can hear us, we come in peace." A resounding echo answered back, a deep thrumming noise that somehow conveyed a single word, "Why?" The three froze. Jurgis nearly lost his grip on the satchel. The voice, if it was a voice, was so low as to be almost imperceptible, more akin to a tremor through their bones than a sound in the air. Rasa steadied herself. "We seek knowledge," she said, voice trembling. "We want to learn the secret of calming storms. We mean no harm." A haunting silence followed, broken only by the drip and flow of water. Then came a sudden swirl of wind through the cavern, lifting droplets into a swirling dance. Lights blue, green, and silvery white converged in a spinning column at the center of the cavern. As the lights brightened, they took form, coalescing into a figure of fluid lines half translucent. The shape was tall, but not quite human. Its limbs and torso shimmered with the color of moonlit water, and its face was a ripple of shifting features. Villiers braced for battle, but Rasa raised her hand. She could sense Chronicle's immeasurable power, an ancient heartbeat that resonated with the sea itself. Jurgis was speechless, transfixed. The entity addressed them once more, not so much speaking, but sending its voice in waves that reverberated through the cavern. "What do mortals know of storms? They stand on shore, trembling, cursing the sea they depend upon. They do not revere or understand. Why should I grant my blessing?" Jurgis mustered his courage. "Because we've come understanding that storms can be both destructive and necessary. We study them in order to respect them, not to dominate them." His words echoed, uncertain yet earnest. Chronicle's shifting face twitched, as though scanning the sincerity of his petition. "Studying? Respecting? Is this your approach?" Rasa glanced at Jurgis, her own heart pounding. "It is," she said. She held up the whalebone token. "You must have known fishermen use these tokens for centuries, hoping to call upon your favor. We follow that tradition. We know you command more than just destruction. We've heard you hold the key to calming the rogue waves that can ravage our coasts." At that, Chronicle's essence flared, the light intensifying to near blinding. "What you ask is to breach the boundary between mortal and divine. The storms are not merely an element to calm on a whim. They are part of a delicate symphony. The voice reverberated with a low rumble, as if thunder itself had found language. Raza held her ground, clasping the token. We do not seek to quell every storm. We only ask for the knowledge of how to quell those storms that escape the natural order, the ones that rise unexpectedly, causing senseless destruction. She inhaled, eyes locked on the rippling visage before her. We believe you alone understand how those storms come to be and how to guide them back to balance. For a moment, Chronicle was silent. Then, with a gesture like a billowing wave, the deity seemed to beckon them further inside, where the rocky walls were bathed in a faint radiance from some unseen underwater source. They followed, each step sending echoes that reverberated up the vaulted ceiling. Vilius kept a cautious watch. Jurgis clutched his satchel, anxiously adjusting his spectacles. Rasa, eyes forward, felt a growing sense of awe. They came upon a grand chamber, the floor blanketed by a shallow, impossibly still pool. In the mirrored surface, they saw the reflection of Chronicle's shimmering figure, multiplied and distorted. From a ledge carved into the stone, a small chest of black coral jutted out, though no mortal hand could have placed it there. Something about the chest pulsed, as though it had a heartbeat. Approaching it, Chronicle extended one fluid arm, resting it upon the chest's lid. Within lies the key of taming, the deity thrummed. Forged before your kind walked these shores, it was meant to safeguard the boundaries between the mortal realm and the raw power of the sea. Take it if you must, he said, luminous eyes resting on Rasa. But with it comes a pact. Rasa stepped forward, her knees weak. The chest's surface was cold to the touch, yet a warmth beckoned from inside. She lifted the lid, revealing a small conch shell that seemed to shimmer with the color of pearls. Delicate in appearance, it somehow resonated with an untold power. She cradled it in trembling hands. Speak into this shell when the waves grow unnatural, Chronicle instructed. Let your voice, carried by the conch, guide the storm toward equilibrium. But remember, storms have life. They fight. And if your heart wavers or is fueled by selfish ambition, the key will fail. Do not abuse this gift. The sea does not forget. Vilius exhaled slowly, impressed by the artistry of the shell. Rasa closed her eyes, scribbling everything in his mind to record later. Rasa closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the power course through her. I understand, she said. Chronicle's form flickered, as though the deity were nearing the end of his manifestation. Go, now, he commanded. A disturbance churns even as we speak. Test your resolve. With those words, the shimmering figure dispersed into a mist of swirling lights, then vanished entirely. The cavern plunged into semi-darkness, lit only by the phosphorescent tide pools. For a time, none of them spoke. They simply stared at the place where Chronicle had stood. The hush felt like the eye of a hurricane. Jurgis eventually broke the silence, clearing his throat. We have it, he said, almost in disbelief. Now we need to find our way back to see if it truly works. Vilius glanced around warily. Let's not linger. The sea is likely getting worse. Gathering their courage, they retraced their steps, leaving the grand chamber for the outer cavern. On reaching the entrance, they saw that the swirling path they'd used had changed. The water roiled violently, filling the space with crashing waves and blasts of salty wind. The outcropping where they'd first landed was submerged. So was the passage that had delivered them. It was as though the sea were testing them already. Rasa clutched the conch shell, her palms sweating. She wasn't entirely certain how to proceed, but Chronicle's words echoed in her mind. Speak into this shell. Guide the storm. Summoning her courage, she raised the shell to her lips. The wind nearly tore it from her grasp, but she held firm. She spoke gently, with conviction. Waves, calm. Storm, relent. In the name of balance, return to the harmony of your origin. Her voice swept into the shell, resonated in a strange hum, magnified and sent outward like a whisper turned into a clarion call. Vilius and Jurgis looked on, hope and fear clashing in their eyes. At first, there was no discernible change. The wind still howled. The waves crashed with fury. Then a tremor rocked the cavern, not violent, but insistent, as though the sea itself mumbled in its great watery throat. Gradually, the tumult receded. The greenish waves that had threatened to drown the entrance grew calmer, receding enough to reveal the path once more. Experiencing a rush of relief, Racer took a shaky step forward. "It's working," she said. Tears mingled with seawater on her cheeks. "We can cross." Moving with haste, the three navigated the watery corridor, stepping carefully across the slick stone. Though the waters still raged around them, they parted enough to make passage possible. Every few moments, Racer whispered more words into the shell, guiding the waves to stillness. Her voice wavered from fatigue, but she persevered, leaning on Jurgis and Vilius for support. At last they emerged from the cavern entirely, onto the ragged outcropping beneath the stormy sky. The tempest overhead was still fierce, but no longer an impossible maelstrom. A short distance away they saw Stasis's boat bobbing wildly on the rough sea. He had returned, either out of duty or concern, to check on them. Spying the trio, he called out in relief. Vilius waved, urging him closer. How they managed to board the pitching vessel without capsizing was something of a miracle in itself. Stasis stared in disbelief at the calmer patch of sea around them. "I've never seen a storm relent like that," he muttered, eyes flicking to the shell in Racer's hands. You really did it, didn't you? You found the Stormlord." Although battered and soaked, Jurgis and Vilius found enough strength to help Stasis rig the sails. Racer leaned against the railing, every muscle shaking with exhaustion but also a quiet pride. The storm was still present, smashing waves in the distance, thunder growling across the heavens. But around their boat was a halo of relative calm, as though acknowledging Chronicle's decision to allow them passage. The journey back to the Fisherman's Cove was arduous. Several times the wind shifted, threatening to send them off course. Each time, Racer lifted the shell and uttered her incantation. By degrees, the boat made progress. When at last they neared the cliffs, they saw the tiny figures of townsfolk gathered. Many had expected never to see them again, and the sight of the group returning sent ripples of awe through the watchers. They docked in the sheltered cove, battered but triumphant. The fishermen hurried forward with ropes and lines, steadying the vessel. Averus was among them, tears glistening in his eyes. He reached for Racer's hand. "Your faces say it all. You found him?" She nodded, too weary to speak. That evening, the three travellers were honoured in the village's modest hall. While they had no intention of flaunting Chronicle's secrets, they shared enough of their tale to convey hope. Jurgis looked forward to penning down what he had witnessed, not as a formula to toy with nature, but as a record preserving the reverence for a power beyond mortal ken. Villiers spoke of how even the mightiest storms could be guided with humility and respect, not with arrogance. And Racer, carefully holding the conch shell, gently reminded the villagers of Chronicle's warning. The sea lives. Treat it with awe. From that night on, rumours spread across the Baltic coast that a relic existed, a sacred conch shell, able to quell rampaging storms and bring mercy upon fishermen's nets. Yet Racer, Jurgis, and Vilius guarded it closely, sharing its blessings only when urged by necessity. They travelled from one coastal hamlet to another, offering calm after a devastating gale, showing that Chronicle's will was not that of capricious fury, but a balanced power that demanded humility. Sometimes, at twilight, a storm would roll in, and Racer would take out the shell, pressing it to her lips. But before she spoke the incantation, she would pause and listen to the voice hidden in every gust of wind and spray of foam, that deep, otherworldly hum resonating from the sea's depths. In those moments, she remembered the deity's rippling face, the shifting eyes that had scanned her sincerity. She recalled how Chronicle had once asked, "Why should I grant my blessing?" Each time, her answer remained the same. She spoke the old words with the quiet conviction of one who had seen the boundary between realms. That subtle interplay of caution and compassion was what Chronicle demanded. A recognition that storms were alive, majestic, and deserving of reverence. Only then would the shell glow with power, weaving her voice into the waters and urging chaos to subside. The warmth of the hidden relic became an unspoken promise. If mortals truly understood their place, Chronicle would answer their plea. And so, even as storms raged on the Baltic horizon, hope endured. Fishermen still made offerings, a shell or fishbone placed on little shrines along the beach, and kept watchful eyes on the shifting sky. They believed that somewhere among the swirling waves was a deity who understood their frailty, yet demanded respect for the ocean's might. And when the thunderclouds pressed low and the roaring wind threatened to shatter their fragile crafts, they placed faith in the whispered knowledge carried in the hearts of the three wanderers. In that marriage of mortal courage and divine mercy, Chronicle remained a constant presence, fierce yet protective, destructive yet nurturing. The fury of the Baltic Sea was never truly vanquished, but it was tempered by understanding, and so the legend grew of a day when mortals humbly approached an ageless power, returned with a key to calm the wildest waves, and reminded all who heard their story that the greatest storms can be quelled when approached with reverence, courage, and a pure heart.